with anything you might have problems with. With that being said, let me introduce you to our today's panelists. Donnie, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so real quickly, our panelists today: Donnie Berkholz, Research Director for Development, DevOps, and IT Ops at 451 Research, and John Enright, Chief Technology Officer for Hostway. And I know Donnie a couple of years from the DevOps space, but I should mention that I know John probably closer to 12 or 15 years from the hosting industry. So it's good to have two friends presenting today, and we will go on from there. Okay.
Thank you, Alan.
Go ahead, John.
All right. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm excited to be talking here today, and I thought we'd kick this off by making things a little bit more interactive and asking a polling question of all of you to understand where you all are so we can give you a better sense of how to proceed from here. Because today we're going to talk through a lot of big picture views of DevOps. If you see that window popping up, just go ahead and click one and submit. And what I'm going to talk about in my section of today's presentation is a little bit about the why of DevOps, and then we're going to move into the what. So what is this DevOps thing all about? You've probably heard a lot about it, but it's been very unclear as to what the point is or what we're trying to do here. And then move into a section on how progress is working out there across the market, how many organizations have successfully adopted it, and what kinds of tools are they choosing. And then finally close out my section of the presentation with some more information on if you're trying to get going with this DevOps thing, what do you do, right? What are some of the key themes involved in terms of what kinds of actions you should start taking to set up your organization, get the right tools in place, get the right organizational structure in place, so that as you do adopt DevOps, you have a much better chance of being successful with doing it. And so in terms of the big picture stuff.
Donnie?
Yeah.
Donnie, Alan, for a second. I just wanted to mention that the polling was put out to the audience, and the answers were tabulated. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, or if you want to mention, but 43% answered just getting feet wet, and 50% answered in process. Mm-hmm. So fully 83% are somewhere along, they've started their DevOps transformation or along the path of DevOps.
Yeah, no, thank you for pointing that out. And it's, yeah, the panelists' results make perfect sense. I can understand why all of you are here today, because you don't have no plans of doing DevOps, and you also haven't become successful with it yet, right? So you're the right people to be here, and we're talking about the right stuff for you today. So I'm glad we've got a good fit here between you showing up and what we're going to be talking about. So make sure you stick around for the whole thing. So big picture right now, we're seeing a lot of transformations across the industry right now. This whole digital transformation buzzword or buzz phrase is something I'm sure you've heard, something that a lot of executive level folks are very concerned about. Everybody's trying to keep up with, you know, some kind of disruptive startup in every industry across the board, whether it's, you know, cars or banking or insurance or anything else. And they're all settling on a number of different approaches to get there. One of the key underlying concepts, though, is these shifts in IT priorities. And the reason I'm showing you this slide is we ask about IT priorities at the high level in large-scale surveys. That N at the bottom, in case you're not familiar with seeing survey data, that's how many people we asked. So we went out and talked to 1,500 to 2,000 IT decision makers and asked them, what are your key priorities right now? And ask them the same thing over time so we know the direction in which things are headed. The important part of this slide is those blue and orange boxes on the top. This is the big shift that's starting to happen, which is fewer and fewer IT shops are thinking about cost cutting and efficiency as their sole priorities, but instead they're adding new priorities to those, right? They're adding a coupled approach of more agility, but also being able to try and move fast without destroying everything, right? The question is, how can you be like an Etsy? How can you deploy weekly, daily, or even hourly without breaking everything for your customers all the time and making even more effort for yourselves than you already have? And so that's why those two approaches of agility and risk really go hand in hand. They're not at opposites with each other. They're something that you can couple by pulling in these DevOps approaches of how do you deliver faster, but how do you do it in a sufficiently automated way such that you can get a lot of guarantees around it working once it gets out there. And another recent survey we ran, a little bit smaller scale this time, but we wanted to dig into the DevOps questions much more closely and get to the right people for those. We asked people across all kinds of different roles, what kinds of pressure are you seeing to move faster? And unsurprisingly, the majority, pick your role, it doesn't matter, the majority of people, almost 2/3 people, 63% up there at the top say, yeah, we're feeling a lot of pressure to move faster. One of the really interesting things about this is that it's independent of how fast they're already moving. No matter how fast you're moving today, everybody's feeling pressure to move faster somehow, right? If you're at quarterly releases, you're probably looking to move to monthly or feeling pressure to move to monthly or weekly. If you're at monthly or weekly, you're probably feeling pressure to move to weekly or daily. And even for those at daily releases, they might be feeling more pressure to be able to get bug fixes and minor features out to their customers even faster than they were before. And so that brings us to the how of what do you do so that you can move faster, but as the new Facebook motto goes, move fast with stable infrastructure, which is much less compelling than the old one of move fast move fast and break things, but at the same time much more rational, because it turns out a lot of us have customers that we can't be breaking stuff for all the time. And so this big picture of what DevOps is all about to me and what it's all about to the industry, I think there's a lot of different levels we can talk about this at, and it's valuable to have a few different ways to talk about it so that, if you're trying to convince your executive leadership, you can say one thing. If you're trying to convince, sort of mid-level IT management, you can say another thing. If you're trying to talk to your practitioners, your systems engineers, your developers about what it's all about, you can say something else. And you got to have that right metaphor to talk to the right people, because you're never going to get to becoming a DevOps organization if you can't get buy-in from everybody, from the deciders to the doers. And so at the high level, the way I like to think about it is taking an agile approach, not getting too tied up on the process of agile, because that's a whole other rat maze we can get into, but taking the agile approach of moving quickly, moving to shorter iteration cycles. And that approach a lot of times happens within the development team, maybe moves into the testing organization. It does not move out to production. It does not move out to reaching customers. And so we take that agile approach, and with DevOps what we do is we really stretch it out farther within the business, to stretch not just within software dev and test, but from the business unit itself to the customers. And that gives you two huge benefits. One of them is delivering features to your customers faster, to your users faster. And the second one is being able to iterate based on that, right? Being able to get out there with the people who are actually using the software and understand, hey, you know what, we might not have built the right thing, right? We have to build this culture of experimentation here. We have to be willing to iterate, right, and try and learn from all the Bay Area startups to find product market fit and do so in a way that's a lot faster than the old, 6 to 18-month project-based waterfall cycles that we're used to. And so I think the really important part here is it's not just about building software faster, it's about being able to build the right software and get it to your users more quickly. And so DevOps at sort of this medium level, I like to break it down into three main pillars, right? What do we have to do to be able to move faster? And there's three main areas to doing so. There's culture, right? Getting the right organizational structure in place so that, all the tools in the world won't save you from a broken process. And if you can't fix those processes and can't fix those cultural barriers to being able to move quickly, you're never going to be able to get there just by automating your infrastructure, just by putting in a continuous delivery pipeline. So you got to get that culture in place. It's a critical aspect. The second piece, automation, right? And we're talking about automation at a couple of different layers here. We're talking about both infrastructure automation using things like configuration management tools, as well as automating your build and release pipeline, right? So that the application level software that's reaching your end users and customers is something that can be delivered to them quickly and reliably, right? Getting that agility and that risk that we were just talking about. And finally, the third one, which is the metric side of things, measurement, right? And this is about getting a measurement infrastructure in place that supports the kinds of changes you want to make, right? As you move increasingly to the cloud, as you increasingly automate your infrastructures, you have to have metrics tooling that supports that kind of shift. You also have to have measurement tooling that measures not just the servers, not just the apps, but measures what are the key end user KPIs that you care about. What are those metrics that matter, right? Whether that's people falling out of a shopping cart, whether that's measuring sales transactions. It's important to help building that cultural empathy, right, between the business unit and the IT groups that work to implement the things that the businesses need. You have to be able to measure the right metrics to be able to provide them the things they care about and to be able to start building that kind of collaboration and cooperation. So let's dig a little bit deeper on these three pillars, right? We've got culture. This is about eliminating silos within your organization, because every time there's another barrier that your software has to go to from the point at which you're talking to the business about what the requirements should be to the point at which it's reached end users, every additional barrier is going to introduce additional delay. Every additional human in that process is going to slow things down a little bit more. And so you have to be able to eliminate those silos and replace them with collaborative environments, with things that look more like product-oriented teams rather than functionally oriented teams, so that you can actually get these things out there quickly and start building the right thing, right, and not building something that got filed through a ticketing system that got delayed and got reassigned 5 or 7 times. You got to be able to move on to building the right stuff and building it and being able to ship it quickly, and culture is a huge piece of that. Secondly, automation. And so, like I said, this comes in a couple of different aspects. I want to just talk a little bit about them and also share an example of a company out there that ran into some huge issues because it wasn't efficiently automated. So we've got this infrastructure as code idea, right? And what we're talking about here is everything in your IT infrastructure should be defined in the form of code. And that means a lot of organizational shifts that have to happen. That means a lot of shifts in what individual systems engineers are going to be doing, right? Because if you want to move to this infrastructure as code setting, that means you have to have systems engineers who are writing code, systems engineers who know how to use version control, systems engineers who understand how to use things like GitHub, for example, understand how to use Git itself, because it's not an easy tool to get up and running with, understand modern software engineering techniques. And this is why, tying this level of tooling, infrastructure as code, back to the cultural aspect I was just talking about, how can they learn this? Well, it's by pairing them up with the developers who are building stuff. They can both share those techniques with each other, and they can understand, why it's important to be agile. And then conversely, your developers can understand the risk-driven aspects that many production support engineers come into this with, and understand why that's important, and help build software that's more supportable in production ultimately. So one example I wanted to talk about was this company called Knight Capital. And Knight Capital was a high-frequency trading firm. A couple years back, what happened was in the span of 45 minutes, they deployed a software bug that lost them almost $500 million, which is a shocking amount of money to lose. And what happened was they deployed to 7 out of their 8 production servers because they didn't understand what the production environment really looked like, and they were doing it all by hand. And had they treated their servers, if you come across this metaphor of cattle versus pets, right? Had they treated their servers more like cattle and less like pets, more like a fleet of production servers, and effectively automated their infrastructure and their deployment pipeline, this is a problem that never would have happened. Now, the second aspect of this pillar is continuous delivery, right? And this is about the build pipeline part of things, right? And so a lot of times we'll see people picking up open source tools like Jenkins is a very popular approach for implementing continuous delivery, implementing continuous integration, starting to move toward continuous delivery, and even continuous deployment. And this picture, I think, gives you a good sense of what does that structure look like as you move from the agile that you might have today toward continuous integration, toward building software that's ready to deploy to production, and eventually deploying it to production on a regular basis. So now I want to briefly show you a couple of data points about where things are today. Most people, as are you today, getting started with DevOps, most people are somewhere in the middle, right, about manual with limited automation or automated with manual exception handling, right? So if issues come up, people have to fix it by hand. Most people are not yet at some kind of panacea of everything is fully automated, auto-remediating, policy-driven, everything fixes itself. That's a long ways out still. The second the last pillar, the second technical pillar of DevOps is this measurement aspect, right? And this is about moving from a lot of traditional monitoring tools that haven't effectively added cloud native functionality to them to this entirely new set of tools that's very user experience oriented, provides a better experience for operators. Tools like the Elastic Stack are a great example of this. Tools like Sensu, again, a great example of this. Many others out there, whether open source or proprietary, are providing a new experience that supports these kind of cloud requirements. So a couple more data points on where people are with DevOps. Across the board, we see people that we talk to enterprises, roughly 40% of them are somewhere on this DevOps adoption journey so far, and so this is definitely reaching the mainstream, right? This is no longer a corner case. This is no longer just for web companies and startups, right? This is now for everybody, and it's for everybody, regardless of company size. Many people are adopting DevOps at this point. And in terms of the tools people are adopting, there's a very broad spectrum. The spectrum tends to move from things that are more typical in agile shops to things such as testing and project management, to things and these kind of cloud environments, and so on. And finally, like I've discussed release speed a couple of times here, release speed still lags demand, like I showed you earlier on. Most companies are at roughly monthly releases with a pretty broad spectrum around it today. They're interested in all moving faster, getting farther towards the left end of that. Now the last section I want to talk about before I hand it off to John is to talk through how can you get ready for this DevOps panacea, right? How can you get to that point of being able to ship releases very quickly without breaking things all the time? And so we're going to talk to some of the key things you can do to get started with this, right? The first one ties back into that cultural aspect of DevOps, which is you have to collaborate with the business to get this right, and that means you have to have the tools in place, you have to have the metrics in place to be able to collaborate effectively, right? You have to understand what are the main KPIs here, what kinds of metrics do you have to track to understand how are you moving faster, how are you reducing mean time to recovery, and how are you doing a better job of delivering what customers need. And secondly, you have to have the right tooling in place to support this kind of collaboration. Right? Tools like Slack and HipChat are becoming increasingly popular for the conversational aspect of this, right? Tools that can help you effectively collaborate across lots of different organizational divides in place and promote that kind of interaction, even across the teams that you may have today before you're able to begin thinking about reorganization. If you enable them to get together, enable them to have these discussions and help promote it, it's much more likely to happen. And then thirdly, the thing we talked about a little bit earlier is moving toward modern collaboration software at the code level, right? Tools like Git. I mean, Git is now the standard for software development. And so if you're not using it and not using tools that support it, which most of them do at this point, right? Even if you're buying from a major enterprise software vendor, most of their ALM suites do support Git at this point. And so you don't need to feel like you need to turn everything over and start from scratch. The second one, and this ties in very closely to that first one, right, which is helping build empathy across the organization, right? You have to help people understand the needs of the other folks within IT, or they're going to continue doing things the same old way, right? You're going to have developers continuing to say, oh, let's ship the software. It's all fine. No worries about bugs. That'll somehow fix itself. And then you'll have ops saying, oh, we can't deploy new software. It's full of bugs, right? We're going to have to hold this off for our maintenance window scheduled for March of next year. Right? And if you don't effectively get these people working together, get them learning new skill sets, put them in the same room so that they can start understanding the different kinds of needs they all have, then it's going to stay the same way it was, right? It's going to stay the same level of throwing things over the wall that it has been, and that's no longer a recipe for success. You can't move fast that way. The next key theme that'll help you get ready for this DevOps transition you're looking to make is to start small. Right? You have to generate some early wins, pick a subset of teams where this might make sense to start with. In many cases, it'll be a brand new initiative where you don't have tons of bureaucracy, you don't have tons of inertia in place, you don't have to worry so much about refactoring. If you have a new project or a new team, this is a perfect place to experiment with this and get started. Especially if you're able to essentially use other people's infrastructure, right? Then you can get up and running much more quickly than waiting around for a bunch of servers to show up at your door. And this is actually a pretty standard change management philosophy. There's a guy named John Cotter who's written a lot about change management over the years. He's got a multi-step process that you can follow to try and make this happen within your own companies. And one of the main steps is, look, if you're trying to do this as some big picture on and off transitions, suddenly we're DevOps, it's very unlikely to succeed, right? You have to start small and help this thing snowball into a win. And now there's a lot of new tools that are involved, and we talked about some of them across the course of the rest of this conversation. There's a lot of these new mindsets, right? There's this whole cattle versus pets idea of your servers have to be fleets and clusters. If you're thinking about handcrafted curation of individual servers over time, you're thinking about it in the wrong way, and you have to change that mindset to be able to move forward with DevOps. You have to start thinking about things in the sense that every server is replaceable because you took advantage of that infrastructure as code approach, and you're starting to shift toward the fully automated infrastructure. You're able to trivially replace any individual server image out there, right? And in many cases, you're able to replace any individual server or VM out there without any downtime of the service, because the service is now living on a cluster. And if any one of those servers disappears, the cluster simply rebalances the load to another one, and you're good to go. And so a lot of these tools we've talked about, I just want to kind of reiterate some of the key ones, right, which is moving to modern source code control, tools like Git, moving toward infrastructure automation with things like configuration management and with things like containers, both of which help you move toward this cluster-driven approach and help you effectively automate the generation of these kinds of applications and environments. And tools like distributed databases, right? How can you have a single database node and try and move toward this cattle-style philosophy of server fleets? Well, you can't. That's the thing. And so you have to think about what are the new styles of working with data that can help support you on this journey as you try and move toward more cloud-native, DevOps-style approaches to IT. And again, I just want to show you one last data point about where companies are with this, and we see about 65% of them are currently at Agile, right? So most of you are probably at Agile today, and you're looking to make that next step. If you're not there yet, Agile would be one of the getting started points for you. You're not going to have success with DevOps if you aren't Agile yet. You're not going to have success with moving to cloud native if you don't have DevOps in place yet. So don't try and jump too many generations on this transition because it's a complicated one. Now, the last thing I want to mention in my portion of this presentation is you got to find the right place to run this stuff. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the sense that in many cases, you don't want to be waiting around 6 months for a bunch of servers to show up at your door so that you can start experimenting with this DevOps style approach to work, right? You want to have places where you can run these things, and you want to have tools that you can pick up quickly too, whether those are software tools or whether those are infrastructure tools, VMs, and so on. And if you are looking to do this, you got to find the right place to do it where the venue, the execution venue where you're running this stuff doesn't get in your way. You've got to have a venue that gets out of your way, that gives you the room to experiment, and that supports the kinds of automation that you're looking to move to. And this is, again, just getting ready for that DevOps transition. You've got to be able to, move faster. You've got to be able to couple that faster approach with a lower risk, and getting the venue out of your way is one of the big pieces to get there. And so that's going to conclude my portion of the presentation. Now I'm going to hand it over to John Enright, who's the CTO at Hostway.
All right, thanks, Donnie. It was a good overview there. So, yeah, my name is John Enright. I'm the CTO here at Hostway. Hostway is one of the most experienced cloud service providers in the industry. So we've been helping our customers navigate their way onto the cloud for almost 20 years now, and we work with clients of all sizes. So we work with everyone from startups that are just kind of getting a foothold out there with a pre-production environment, all the way up to the largest of companies. Samsung is one of our largest clients. We manage the back-end infrastructure for their smart TV service, and you can imagine how complex that is with millions of devices connecting to that platform on an hourly basis. So next slide. Oops. Yep, and I think I have control here now too. Before we go any further, I thought it would be good to see, kind of what experience you all have with the various hyperscale cloud platforms out there. So for those of you who do deploy code or infrastructure to a hyperscale platform and have used any of these in the past, feel free to pick more than one if you have experience with more than one. But curious to see, which ones you've kind of used in the past. Now, I could kind of take a guess as to what the outcome will be here, and certainly previously, I think Amazon would always be the far and away winner. That's kind of changing. So I'm curious to see if that shows up with our audience here as well. And in fact, absolutely. Wow, this is completely different than what it would have looked like, say 3 or 4 years ago. And this is our experience as well. So obviously Amazon is the incumbent leader in this space, but both Microsoft and Google are making huge strides. I think both in terms of market share and even to a greater degree in terms of what the profile of customers coming onto the cloud are today. So Amazon has the dominant existing market share. When you take a look at companies that are moving onto the cloud, Microsoft is really making inroads there, and is coming close to 50% of all new activations on public cloud. So that's interesting. We here at Hostway are actually focused on the Azure platform. That's our specialty, and it's really amazing how far Microsoft has come, both with the tool set that they provide and the platform itself. I'd say one of the things that sets Azure apart from Google and Amazon is that combination of depth of functionality and ease of use. So, one of the, I think, and certainly for me, one of the biggest challenges with DevOps is the cup runneth over when it comes to the various tools that are available to you, and the rate at which all this functionality is increasing is accelerating. It's kind of hard to keep on top of it all. So when you log into Amazon or Google, especially Amazon, and you see the cloud console there, it's just almost ridiculous how many tools are all on that one screen. With the Microsoft Azure platform, there's a similar scope of functionality, but it's a little bit easier to navigate. And the DevOps automation concept is also pervasive across the entire Microsoft set of tools, many of which are already familiar to IT users. So if you're coming from a corporate IT background and you're familiar with using tools like System Center, Virtual Machine Manager, Visual Studio, you don't really have to learn a new tool set. A lot of the automation functionality is built into that existing framework. So of all the different platforms out there, I think Microsoft might have the lowest threshold in terms of adoption and knowledge. They also have an amazing amount of resources out there for education, videos and interactive labs and so on. We support a wide variety of different platform deployments using the Azure framework. That's another one of the advantages there. Microsoft supports a multi-landing zone type of architecture where you can have the same tool set used in public cloud, in private cloud, and also with your on-premise gear. Most of the other vendors, maybe with the exception of folks like VMware, don't support that model. It's either hyperscale public cloud or nothing. So I'll talk a little bit more about the specific solutions we provide. One of the core services we have is the managed Microsoft public cloud service. So with this, what we're doing, our role is really to be the solutions architect for customers. So if you have an existing app, or maybe you have a legacy app that you're trying to move to the cloud, or you have a new app and you're trying to figure out what what does the configuration need to look like from a performance and scalability perspective. Our solutions architects will work with you, solve that puzzle, both from initial configuration perspective, making sure that we're solving forward-looking issues like compliance, PCI compliance, security, and making sure that the environment is hardened. And then from that point onward, we're really acting as your IT department. So our team is there 24/7, keeping an eye on the platform. I think one of the advantages to DevOps, especially if you're following the entire spectrum and doing automated testing before you're going from staging into production, that's going to greatly limit the chance that things are going to go wrong. But we all know, especially in IT, Murphy's Law exists maybe to an order of magnitude greater than many other environments. So something always will go wrong, and when that happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, our team is going to be there as a final line of defense. They're going to proactively respond, either reach out to our customer, or in some cases they'll actually do the initial troubleshooting and break fix. So another one of our really popular solutions is our virtual private cloud. It's kind of an interesting hybrid where you as a developer can have the flexibility and security of dedicated compute nodes. So if you have high performance scenario, or you need lots of CPU power, you're trying to solve a particular workload problem with your application, you can customize those physical hosts. And yet it shares network and storage infrastructure, which typically are some of the most expensive portions of infrastructure to deploy. So you get the flexibility and isolation of dedicated compute nodes at a fraction of the cost of having an entire dedicated private cloud stack devoted to your app. So that's one of the things that sets services like us apart. Versus the hyperscale guys, is that we kind of put your application in a container where it runs best, right? So every app has its own kind of workload profile. You have applications that have a highly variable workload and need to scale up and sometimes back, seasonal workloads, sometimes even intraday changes, highly variable changes in workload. And those apps are definitely best to run in highly scalable hypercloud environments. Then there are plenty of other apps though that have a more consistent workload, that are fairly static, and in many cases clustered, where fault tolerance is built in. And those apps, in most cases, will be far more cost effective running on dedicated physical gear. And there are other apps. We have clients that have applications that actually span our data center, public cloud data centers, and even on-premise. There are some customers who still have applications that, for latency purposes or compliance reasons, they want actually behind their on-premise firewall. And so we span all of those different landing zones. What we're going to do is kind of put you on the platform that makes the most sense for your specific application, rather than having to re-architect your application to work in a different environment. What our real differentiator though goes beyond technology. It's really our people. The way we look at ourselves as we're the folks on the other end of the line. We're the guiding hand for you as you move your application into the cloud. With a lot of the other services, especially the largest services, it's really hard to get someone's attention when something's going wrong. It's really hard to stand out when you have a question, especially when your application is mission critical. So it's very hard to show up on Microsoft's or Amazon's radar screen. All of our customers are at the top of our radar screen. So our team is always there to kind of help solve any problem for you, either whether it's when you're just getting started or years down the line when you're trying to scale your application to the next level. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. Definitely want to leave enough time for questions. One of the things that I mentioned we do is work and consult with customers. We do a free cloud readiness assessment for any prospective client. and would be happy to engage in that conversation with you. So if you have a specific question about an application that you have that you're trying to move into the cloud, or how that would actually go, we'll go as far as actually developing an actual migration plan for you, all free of charge. Reach out to myself directly, and happy to answer any question whatsoever about Microsoft, either here during the Q&A or afterwards. Obviously feel free to reach out to our sales team at any time. And with that, I think we can open it up to some questions.
Thank you. Thanks, John. That was great, Don. Thank you, as always. Great job on your DevOps presentation there. Let's go to the first question from the audience, and that one was regarding Google and Hostway's plans around FedRAMP. And I guess before we answer the specific question, John, do you want to just kind of set the stage? What exactly is FedRAMP for those who may not be familiar?
So there's many different compliance standards. There's PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance. FedRAMP, I think, is the kind of ultimate set of compliance standards, and obviously one that's associated usually with government implementations. Here at Hostway, we support HIPAA compliance for healthcare applications and PCI compliance for e-commerce applications. Actually, PCI applies to very broad set of, because if you're dealing with sensitive information of any kind, not just transactional credit card data, PCI compliance can come into play. FedRAMP is usually there are specialty services that will go to that level with FedRAMP. FedRAMP is something that is on our radar, that we do plan to support in the future. But right now we're HIPAA compliance certified and PCI compliance certified for clients. That is one of the biggest challenges, I think, when dealing with public cloud, private cloud, dedicated, and with any application, is trying to triangulate that, trying to figure out and make sure that that you are compliant. The PCI certification is like 144 different components to it. That's something that we absolutely help customers navigate. Not only making sure that their architecture is PCI compliant, but also making sure that after the fact they remain compliant through security scans. But yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with something like FedRAMP, that process is even more complex. And with regard specifically to Google, I'm not sure what their FedRAMP plans are.
Yep, and just by way, if anyone is interested, you can get more info on FedRAMP at fedramp.gov. And there are many sort of FedRAMP authorized, FedRAMP certified service providers, and many of them listed on the FedRAMP site. Let me go to our next question, though. And that, John, I'm going to throw this question at you. We spoke earlier, you and I are longtime veterans of the hosting industry. How has the process of developing code and infrastructure changed since, over the last 17 years or more? What are some of the challenges in adopting and using the DevOps methodology?
Well, it's completely and totally different. Back in the early days, we had to invent everything from scratch. So when we first started out, oh man, we were using Windows NT, and it just makes me cringe even to mention that, because that was a highly insecure. That was back when security was kind of an afterthought, I think, on the web. And it was a highly manual process. So it was installing a CD-ROM in a machine. Every single machine was slightly different in how it was configured. And over time, we developed a lot of automation from the ground up to make sure that to address all those issues, where to keep our server farm homogeneous, to deploy security patches quickly, because to do so manually would just take way too much time. It would take more than 24 hours to deploy a critical security patch, for example, if you were to try to do it on a manual basis. But we had to do all of that from scratch. We were literally inventing the wheel back then. The amazing thing about today is just how much of that is plug and play. So things like Puppet, it existed years ago, but the level of functionality that is available now with tools like Puppet, Chef, and Ansible is amazing. And the library of scripts that you can draw from, where it's not up to you to write a lot of the scripts to automate things. You can just draw from what everyone else has already contributed. The other thing is the collaborative environment, and that I think is absolutely super critical. So back in the early days, there was that kind of tennis match, right, between development and operations, where it was just a lot of finger pointing. So and invariably something would slip through the cracks, and there'd be some issue, and you'd have operations saying, hey, development, that's your thing, and development would say, no, you got the platform wrong, and you spend a lot of wasted time and effort trying to figure out, where the root cause of something was. And on two fronts today, now it's much more of a team atmosphere. You have the deployment team there with the development team, and the deployment resources are contributing in the project from the beginning so that it's architected correctly, and everyone feels like everyone's moving forward in the same direction. No one's kind of there swimming against the tide. And I think that's to me that almost is as much of an influence on productivity as the automation is. The final thing I'll mention is kind of that root cause portion of things. I remember so many times running into a situation where we had a service level impacting scenario, and ripping our hair out of our heads because we couldn't determine where the issue was. Was it a external compromise? Was it something system failure? What change instigated this current performance impacting scenario? And today, that's so much shortcutted if your application is architected correctly. So rather, if you have a front-end web server that's acting up for any reason, rather than spending hours trying to research what's causing this problem, they're disposable. You can immediately destroy that container and redeploy a fresh container, with the same template, and you're back up and running instantly. You have your service level back, and then retroactively, now that your service levels are restored, now you can go back and investigate, what was the root cause of that issue. So in a nutshell, I would say the difference between today and 17 years ago is a whole lot less stress. Thankfully.
Excellent. Yes. Okay, our next question, I'm going to throw this one. I think this might be more of a Donnie question, which is on databases and DevOps, and it's how to deploy Azure SQL databases via automation. Donnie, I don't know if I put you on the spot here with this one, but is that something you can shed some light on for people? Donnie, you might be on mute, perhaps.
Sorry, you hear me now?
There you go. Yes, we hear you now.
Excellent. Got 3 different mute buttons over here, and I have them all activated so I don't start breathing heavily when I get too excited during John's section here. Yeah, I think the question about databases is a really interesting one because it's a lot easier to automate a web server or a mail server or many other things compared to the databases, and that's where it really starts to get challenging. And I talk to a lot of our clients about they're trying to do this DevOps thing and they had an easy time here, and then they start getting to areas like databases or storage or network, and suddenly it gets really challenging, both for organizational reasons, right? Like there might be a separate DBA team and they're not buying into the DevOps, but also from a tooling perspective. And so, I talk to a lot of people, and they're all trying to move toward, how do we do this DevOps thing or this continuous delivery thing with databases, right? How can we break changes down into small pieces that it's not, again, the huge, we're migrating the schema, everything's going crazy type change that, feels very prone to breakage and requires downtime windows and all that. And so there's actually a number of different vendors and open source tools that I think are really applicable to this. I'll mention a few of the open source ones to kind of get you started. And this ties into one of the themes I was talking earlier about getting ready for DevOps, which is as long as you can run the tools anywhere you feel like, take your pick of execution venue. As long as it gets out of your way, unless you run the tools you want to, you can do it. Right? And so some of the main open source tools in that space are, there's one called Liquibase, there's another one called Flyway, and there's a third one called Skitch, S-Q-I-T-C-H. And I run into all of them pretty regularly, probably the first two the most, Liquibase and Flyway. Some of them have companies behind them that'll support you if you want them, some of them don't. And then there's a handful of vendors that help with this too. And if you want to learn more about exactly how to bring automation and DevOps into a database environment, I would say there's actually a pretty decent Wikipedia page called Schema Migration that you should go check out to learn a little bit more about that if you don't want to check out the individual projects themselves.
Great. Well, I wanted to go to another question we got from the audience. That was around identity access management in hybrid cloud. What role might a capability like Active Directory, for example, have in managing an Office 365 deployment? So this is actually something I know a lot about. John, Donnie, I'll give you guys the first crack if you, I don't know how up you are on this stuff, if you want to answer the question.
I can comment on it. So, with Microsoft Azure, there's a hosted Active Directory, and even though it sounds like a simple thing like moving Active Directory from your data center into the cloud, it's one of those little things that winds up making a gigantic difference. So once you're on hosted Azure Active Directory, you can then, it's much easier to bolt onto that from Office 365, also from access control and identity management for the rest of your infrastructure. Also for applications that you deploy on the Azure platform. So a lot of applications now are pre-designed when they're deployed on Azure to integrate with hosted Azure Active Directory. So it's kind of like the revolution with Docker and versus Virtuoso, right? So Virtuoso is a file container technology that's existed for about a decade. It was kind of languishing, but then along comes Docker and has a couple of few little things that just make a gigantic difference. Integration with Git and command line ease of use and ability to snapshot and roll back. Just a few things. Same underlying concept in technology though, and then wow, just an order of magnitude more useful and pervasive. Same thing with something as simple as that Active Directory. Just the act of moving it into a standardized hosted environment actually makes a big difference in terms of your ability to integrate it with, very easily integrate it with a variety of different applications.
And I would just mention, if you're moving, let's say Amazon versus Azure, or perhaps a Linux-based environment, there are directory as a service type of offerings that will give you AD as well as LDAP. Jump Cloud is one I know for sure. There's another one, Donnie, you probably know. I can never pronounce it. Not Oken. Something. Anyway, it's escaping me now. What'd you say, Donnie? I'm sorry.
Okta?
Okta, that was it. Okta, I think, is another one. But let us move to the next question, as we're getting a little shorter on time. I really do like to try to get this. Here's, Donnie, this one I think is more right up your alley. Can you give us some advice on how to successfully break down silos, walls, and improve culture? So the quintessential DevOps question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear John's perspective on this too. In terms of breaking down those silos, the best thing you can possibly do is just get everybody in the same room. Physically in the same room is the easiest, but it's also possible to get people virtually in the same room. Some of the tools I talked about earlier were some online chat tools like Slack and HipChat, and IRC is one that's been around for many, many years, and Skype for Business supports rooms. So the tooling itself isn't super important in terms of which one you pick, as long as it supports some kind of approach where you can get people in the same virtual or physical room who are in a lot of different roles. Because a lot of this is about the more you get them together, the more empathy you can build, right? The more they'll understand the requirements that the other side has. And if you change from a culture where the dev team is incented to ship fast and the ops team is incented to not ship anything because they're based on not breaking stuff, whereas devs are based on getting features out the door, right? If you can move away from that approach by building empathy, by getting people in the same room, that's what's going to help you get ready to make this big DevOps transition. All right, and so, like I said, the best thing you can do is get them in the same room. Next step from there is trying to understand, okay, can we experiment with getting some, let's say organizational liaisons involved in the requirements building process so that, when you're creating a requirements for an application, a lot of times thinking about running it in production, those requirements aren't seen, right? The only requirements that are seen are the customer requirements and not the requirements of what's it going to take to operate this thing. How do we create a good operator experience so that we're not always firefighting? Another good example is getting developers to be on call for their own applications when they're running in production. So again, building empathy. If they get paged at 2 in the morning, they're suddenly going to understand a lot more what it looks like for the operator side of things, and they're going to be a lot more interested in making it easier to operate.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. I think the other component and the flip side of that would be also building a culture of success, right? So kind of fostering that team spirit. A lot of times when, especially on the the traditional operations side of the house, the only time they know that something happened is if it's a bad thing, like it broke or and they need to fix it. But when things go really well and the change accomplished its objective, oftentimes they don't get that feedback. And if you have that kind of team mentality, hey, we're going to take this project from beginning to end, but then even at post-release, like, look, we've made this change, and here's what happened. Here's the positive impact. Here's this feature that was released, and here's the adoption rate. Here's the utilization rate, and sharing that data with the team so that you foster the culture that change is good. Change is good. Change leads to happy customers. Change leads to innovation. Change leads to things that take the company to the next level. And then there's that. Then the team has a desire to make more changes. It's kind of that just continuous feedback loop there.
Okay. On the schema migration, right? Someone had wanted the Wikipedia page. We can't find it right now, but Jules, if we can make a note, let's try to post that when we post the recording. If we can, post that out there, the page with it, so we can get them. Rick, we lost sound. I apologize. I think that might be our last question here from the audience. And as luck would have it, we're almost out of time, so that's a good thing. Let me wrap up here in our last few moments. First of all, John Enright, after all these years for us to be doing a webinar together, back on hosting nonetheless, is I guess our lives have come full circle. I look forward to doing more with you and then seeing you in person soon. Donnie, always a pleasure to have you on one of our webinars and talking DevOps with our audience. Hope again to have you on as well. We'll be working on that. And most of all, to our audience, thank you for spending the last hour or so with us. We hope it's been informative. I know everyone, I wrote to some people privately who asked, this webinar is of course recorded. All of our webinars go on to our YouTube channel, which is DevOps TV, all one word. And you can see every webinar we've done there, as well as a bunch of other interviews and stuff I do with various DevOps events, such as DevOps Enterprise Summit and others as well. So please check that out. Thank you very much to Hostway for sponsoring today's webinar, the 451 group, of which Donnie works. And we'll wrap it up then. Donnie, again, thank you. John, thank you. Everyone else, thank you for attending. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, and we'll see you soon on another DevOps.com webinar.